On Friday, 4th of July, the first ever anti-gentrification protest happened in Mexico City. And it's like a Pandora box open on social media. You could see people that were against gentrification, people who kept criticizing people who were against gentrification, foreigners talking about what they feel, how they feel attacked, how they are agreeing to the people protesting, etc. It's been a hot topic for weeks here. Originally, the plan was to meet at a park as a gathering point to have a sort of discussion about this issue of gentrification in Mexico City. But so many people showed up that what ended up happening was a spontaneous march. Basically, because there are people concerned more than what they thought, if not, fed up with this problem of gentrification. Who's at fault here? Are the immigrants that come here the problem? Or are the owners that accommodate them over long term residents and natives the real problem? Is this a xenophobic take? Let's not get things mixed up because no, criticizing gentrification is not xenophobia, but let's look into it. Hi, welcome to Bean Talks. I talk mainly about, pop culture, whatever issues going on in the world that I'm interested about. This one was very spontaneous. I've been wanting to talk about this topic of gentrification in Mexico City for a while now because I'm born and raised here. And, but today was very spontaneous. I'm not even wearing makeup. So, yeah, I just want to talk about this because I've seen people that keep talking and talking, and a lot of people in the states or other parts of the world are getting false information of people saying like, no, they just hate us and they're suddenly xenophobic against us, and it's like, let's back up there. let's hear another take. I want to give my take as a person who lives here, and even though I don't live in Condesa or Roma, which are the most gentrificated parts, I'd say right now, I live very near to it. I live like what, 20 minutes away, 15 maybe. So yeah, I've seen it, I've felt it, so I just want to give my 2 cents in this. Anyways, welcome to Bean Talks, and I'm very happy that you're here. Let's start from the beginning. What's gentrification? Gentrification is when a neighborhood changes because wealthier people move in, bringing higher rents, new businesses, and renovations, often pushing out long-time residents who can afford the rising costs. It usually starts when an area that's seen as more affordable or up and coming becomes attractive to people with more money, who are looking for a cheaper property close to the city center or, with a cultural appeal. Over time, property values change and, rent goes up. Business change. In old and expensive shops get replaced by trendy cafes, boutiques, etc. The biggest example I have about this is like, your usual maybe family owned cafeteria changes to a Starbucks, or if you go to, I don't know, like a boxing club or center, I don't know how to call them, a training box trainings thingy, or go to a small gym, suddenly changes to a Pilates center, or a gym that it's owned by a, like a chain, maybe like, I don't know, Planet Fitness or something. Lower income residents are displaced, obviously, because they can't keep up with the cost of living. It's a mix of urban development and social displacement. And while some see it as a sign of revitalization or evolution, for others it's a sign of exclusion. I think one good example in media could be the last season of Shameless. I don't know if you watch it. I love it. Shameless USA, obviously, I don't know. I haven't finished watching the other one. And when they started facing actual gentrification, it's kind of like that, only way worse because it happens in real life and it could affect anyone at any time because, unless you're part of the 1% part of the world population that it's, insanely rich, you can always be a victim of gentrification. Ever since the pandemic, gentrification has been a problem in Mexico City. We started getting the visits of digital nomads that never really left, and people, from Europe, from the States, from Canada, Asia. We've got tons, for you to pick, and a ton of myths and guilt have been shared on channel. And today, here, I'm gonna try to explain them and or correct them if necessary, from my point of view as a person who's, raised in Mexico, lives in Mexico City. I've been living here for, I don't know, a good while now. And I don't know, I think I can even give my 2 cents from a very specific point because I used to live in the skirts of the city. Like I was like 2 hours away before, and then I moved here like almost 10 years ago. 10 years? Yeah, maybe, I don't know. It's been a while. But I don't know. I think I can give my 2 cents as a person who's actually, been living the gentrification and maybe um benefit from it, or, like been affected by it. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to understand a little bit more of what we think about this and why? Believe me, it's bigger than just Mexicans don't want gringos, because I've seen videos like that on TikTok and it's like, not exactly. Let's talk about it, bear with me.
Bear with me. Bear with me. Bear with me.
First, gentrification doesn't mean that someone moves to your city. It's not inherently part of a person that moves. There are foreigners who don't gentrify. There are foreigners who do gentrify. There are Mexicans who are gentrified, and there are Mexicans who gentrify. Because sometimes I think people forget about this. You can also be part of the problem, and at the same time suffer. Gentrification is an issue of class inequality, not inherently one of migration. The problem is that people are mixing apples and oranges here. On one hand, we have an undeniable housing crisis that many people are suffering from. And the other, we have undeniable geopolitical and historical tensions with the United States, which right now are at a particularly high point because of Trump tariffs and what happened at the in Los Angeles a couple months ago, ICE and everything. There was a ton of people online saying, "You all just want to live in Condesa, and Condesa and Roma without actually, having to pay anything or, having a special tariff for you. If you can afford it, why don't you just go live in Iztapalapa?" A little context here, if you're not from Mexico or ever, visit us. Iztapalapa is one of the 16, we call them alcaldías. It would be like a borough, a city, I don't know, like a borough, I think, of Mexico City, located in the eastern part of the capital. It's known for several things. Population, it's the most populous borough in Mexico City with over 1.8 million residents. It historically has had lower income neighborhoods and less infrastructure investment compared to central areas like Roma or Condesa. It hosts the famous, Semana Santa Passion Play, one of the biggest in Latin America. Actually, like you can search this up. It's pretty big. I've never been to it, but I know it's big. And like many large districts, it faces issues like overcrowding, limited public services, and rising housing prices, which is why mentioning go live in Iztapalapa often carries a classist undertone in Mexican debates about gentrification. It's like, okay, you can afford it, go live here that I consider it's lower, than where I live or lower than me, which is, like completely wrong. Not only it is annoying how they always use Iztapalapa as, like with a whiff of classism, but also, I don't know if you've noticed, like I mentioned before, rental prices in Iztapalapa are also going up a lot. Because gentrification processes can trigger chain reactions in the city. Because, if a group of people is expelled from the neighborhood they've been living in, they'll move somewhere else. It's not like they're, like just gonna stop existing, they're gonna vanish. No, that's not how it works. And that's going to have an impact on the neighborhood they move to. It's not an aspirational thing like, oh, we want a luxury lifestyle too, but rather these are families and people who have been living in a place for years who then get misplaced. For example, decades ago, Coyoacan, which is another very popular, touristic point in our city, wasn't what we think of as Coyoacan today. Believe it or not, some areas of neighborhoods like Condesa did experience gentrification processes a while back. Like Coyoacan, I remember my mom used to go to school there. She used to go, it used to be, I don't know, like when my mom talks about it, it's very religious to me because she used to go to a school of nuns. I don't know how to say it in English, like a school that was run by nuns there, and it was very common. So for me, it's like that. And she used to tell us like, oh, La Casa Azul, which is like it's the house of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, which are very famous painters from here. She used to tell me like, no, it used to be like free. You can go in all the time because when she would like skip class or would go out earlier, she would go there and it was like free to go into. And now you have to pay your tickets from like a month in advance. I don't know, like that's the main thing I think about. And now when you go, you can see like big groups of people, of, like foreigners that come from a lot of parts of the world, not only from the States or Canada. They come here to see, like Coyoacan, and it's because it's very cultural. I love Coyoacan, but I don't really go because it's that exactly. You have a lot of people there that aren't Mexican. It's like not like that's a bad thing, but there's a huge crowd always. So, like it experienced gentrification process a while back, as well as Condesa. Now there are a ton of foreigners that live there. And, like right now they're even trying to sell a part of Tepito at Roma Norte. And if you don't know Tepito, if you're not from here or have ever been here, Tepito is a very um difficult part of the city. I don't know how to explain because I don't know, like I know they always mention the Bronx to be heavy, but I don't know if this is like this heavy. It's like Skid Row. It's kind of Skid Row, I think, but now they're trying to gentrificate it. Like it's that bad. The gentrification in Tepito, which is like, if you live here or been here, it's always like you never go to Tepito. You never go to Tepito alone. At least you go with someone who knows Tepito, because it's that difficult. It's kind of linked with certain businesses that aren't exactly I don't want to say legal, but I don't want to say they are legal. So it's difficult. And they're already gentrificating that part. And they're saying it as if it were Roma Norte, because it's in the same borough, but it's not the same. It's a different neighborhood. Well, after this long intro of my thoughts on the matter, let's get right into the myths I mentioned before. Myth 1. It's false that gentrification is the same as gringo digital nomads. I specify gringo because they always use that word, and they always say like it's gringos, and it's not always them. I'm not the biggest fan of people that don't respect our culture, but it's not always them. Gentrification is a process generated by countless macro factors, especially fundamental ones. A very poor housing supply. I know people who protest against gentrification hate when we mention supply and demand, but that's how it works at the core. The metropolitan area of Mexico City is this big, with 20 million people living and moving around. But the area where economic, educational, and cultural activities are concentrated, along with graded urban infrastructure and public services, is dismal. And of course, this makes housing in that area more valuable, because there will always be people willing to pay more to live near their workplace or near parks for their kids or dogs. While jobs can be decentralized, since economic centers require a certain density of demand, the problem in Mexico City is that we have many economic centers clustered together in a very small space, forming an economic meta center, or a center of economic centers, actually, and no real efforts have been made to change this. In fact, for decades, the state of Mexico, governments have been happy with this dynamic. The state of Mexico, it's like, I'm gonna put a map here, but it's kind of like it covers Mexico City. It's big, but it's like a 2 hour drive depending on where you live. Um, and they've been happy with this dynamic. They basically received a huge number of people who pay taxes and consume their municipalities, believe the responsibility of creating jobs to someone else. For example, most people think the population of Mexico City has grown a lot, but that's not true. From the 90s to today, it went from 8.2 million to 9.2 million. Just a 12% increase in 30 years, which is nothing for the country's most important city. However, in the same period, municipalities bordering Mexico City grew from 7 million to 12 million, a 67% increase. And while there are always some strange people who like living in Tecamac while working in Reforma, which is at least a 2 to 3 hour trip, most would rather live close to their job. Mexico City has only 3 million homes. And obviously, not all of them are in areas where you can have a decent life without, like having to go through hell and back in public transport or traffic. Let's say half are in these zones, which is probably optimistic. That means about 1.5 million homes in decent, serviced areas for the 20 million people moving around the city. And the amount of housing built is extremely low, actually. It's estimated the city needs 11,000 to 50,000 new homes a year. But in 2023, only 1,700 were built, and almost none of these are social housing. Most people want housing prices to drop, but don't want more housing built, or want huge houses built as if space weren't finite. So yes, I know you hate hearing about supply and demand, but housing supply in the city is far below demand, and that's going to push prices up, whether we like it or not. Point B, urban infrastructure. In Mexico City, urban infrastructure is very unequal. Basically, the most expensive neighborhoods have access to basic services like, water, electricity, parks, markets, etc., and others don't, because many parts of the city didn't come from urban planning, actually, but from informal settlements where people just built as they could and the government did nothing about it. And one of the infrastructures that worsen the housing problems most is, public transportation. If, getting from the outskirts of the economic meta center is going to be a grueling journey where you might not even live that far, but transport is overcrowded, or you live far and much of your trip depends on small buses, then central housing is naturally become, more valuable. If traveling from the outskirts like Chalco, Iztapalapa, Ecatepec, or Atizapan to, the meta center took 40 minutes by subway or train, the man will cease, because it would still be nice to live nearby, but 40 minutes isn't that bad. Gentrification wouldn't be as big of a problem if displaced people were, moved to places with public services, infrastructure, and transport instead of Chimalhuacan or Tizayuca, outskirts populations that lack those services. There's also the housing policy. The government has abandoned housing policy and left it to the market. And look, I believe free market, usually has a better result, but I also believe in necessary regulations, and housing is one area where regulations should be strict because free markets are often counterproductive. One pillar of free market is substitute goods. If chicken is expensive, you then buy beef, or instead you buy, fish or something. Housing has no substitute goods. Except maybe moving to another state, which often is impossible because of job availability. When a good has no substitutes and is as essential as housing, those who supply it can be highly abusive because people will pay, given that the alternative is living under a bridge. Government must have adequate urban policies, not only building housing but building social and public housing, decentralizing economic centers, giving more neighborhoods, urban infrastructure, building efficient transportation options, etc. And yes, implementing regulations to limit housing as an investment tool. But this hasn't happened for many years. These three factors, plus many others, cause gentrification and housing problems in general, not the gringos or like in general people that come here. Before digital nomads, Condesa was already unaffordable for most Mexicans. I mean, yes, the presence of immigrants with higher purchasing power doesn't help, but it's not a major factor, especially when looking beyond one neighborhood that has been inaccessible for decades. We talk too much about Condesa and too little about how in, like Iztapalapa or Iztacalco, apartments now go from 7,000 to 10,000 pesos a month. Myth 2. We should cap prices and raise salaries. Neither is a solution. Things have a value independent of, government decrees. If prices are capped, a black market will likely emerge where people secretly pay more to live in more valuable places. Yes, it can be fought, but it's expensive to constantly keep an eye on it, and not immune to corruption. If salaries rise but the supply of decent housing doesn't, prices will go up because, now I can afford more rent, but so can everyone else. It's much better to tackle the causes, like the ones I mentioned above, than pretend this can be solved with a couple of degrees. It's like putting a band-aid on the whole problem, I think. Point 3, this isn't a myth, but it's also a problem. Municipalities and cities have big incentives to allow gentrification. Since it's tied to higher tax revenues and economic growth, it's, like tempting to see this as greed, that they don't care about people's lives. But taxation is essential for cities to survive. It's no coincidence that many gentrification cases arise in bankrupt cities, post-disaster, or underdeveloped places that urgently need resources. Myth 4. The NIMBYism, like not in my backyard, or in Spanish, sí pero aquí no. Like yes, but not here, is an urban phenomenon where people don't want anything to change if it affects them. Basing the right to the city on the idea that people who live in a place today should always live there is a sentimental oversimplification that keeps central areas inaccessible to more people. Like in Coyoacán, where people in, like 12 million pesos mansions don't want apartment buildings built. It's in general, whenever there are houses, people don't want apartments, or the classism will block. If the government had the will, which it doesn't, building social housing in expensive places, preferring urban infrastructure in already expensive areas. The argument is, I was here first, then both the Coyoacan man and the Narvarte woman, which are, like expensive zones of the city, that don't want people from Iztapalapa living nearby, they have the right to block it, and, like, no, that's effed up, I think. Cities are dynamic. People move from, like various regions, and favoring the idea that because someone grew up in one place, no one else should have access to it has no logical basis. We can't run housing policy like children and calling dibs on something. Neighborhoods change, cities change, and, like 50 years ago, many neighborhoods didn't even exist. The biggest problem is that there's very little decent housing in the city, so only wealthier people can access it. If people displaced move to, like a neighborhood with services, job, safety transport, and sidewalks, the problem wouldn't be as bad. If the 21st century Gestapo, the US, like yellow in English, uses your protest sign to justify its fascist policies, pointing out that your arguments are the same as theirs, you might want to question whether your demands are being made in the right way, I think. Now, why people don't see this as real housing problem in here, and, some conclusions. Now, let's debunk when people say, the ones who don't consider the housing problem to be a real problem. First, like it's they want to live in Condesa, they want to live in luxury and not pay for it. And no, people aren't demanding luxury housing. They are demanding decent housing, which is not the same thing. And it's worrying that some people think it is. Luxury housing is a 40 million pesos house in a gated community in Pedregal, surrounded by, more 40 million pesos houses. Pedregal is a very expensive part of Mexico. I don't know how to put an example for you guys if you're not from here, but I don't know. Maybe the OC, I think, kind of like it's very expensive. So, a crappy 60-year-old apartment in Condesa with a drunk guy passed out next to the door is not exactly luxury housing, I think. Now let's go to the root of the problem. Let's suppose that indeed the majority of people want to live in Condesa. Why do you think that is? Is it because there are fancy restaurants serving 200 pesos chilaquiles for brunch? Because there are a lot of, bars? Or is it because it's centrally located neighborhood, connected by metro, metrobus, and bike share, and only 15 minutes from job zones instead of 2.5 hours like, they probably do now? Or because it's a place where they can actually go out for a walk with trees, parks, and somewhat clear sidewalks. Because again, if you think a luxury place looks like the area outside Metro Chilpancingo, which is, Condesa and stuff like that, I don't think you really understand the concept of luxury. People don't necessarily want to live in Condesa. They want to live in a place that doesn't drain days out of the year commuting to work, where there's a bit more safety, where there are trees along the sidewalks, or, sidewalks at all to begin with, that's near cultural and sports centers, and if and this I think this is not a luxury, it's basic for dignified housing. It's very problematic that so many people believe something basic is asking for too much. Not having to endure 6 hours a day in transit, or living in a place with even minimal basic infrastructure should not be a luxury deserved, reserved for only 4% of the population. And we need to stop thinking it should be. Second, property owners have the right to, rent for whatever they want or to whomever they want. Nobody owes you an upper middle class lifestyle. Here, upper middle class is again referring to living in decent areas. Look, I know that historically in Mexico we've grown up with the idea of, living off or rental income. Housing has always been seen as an investment tool here. This, although it may not seem like it, it's not, the standard absolutely everywhere in the world. Yes, in most places, but not everywhere. As I mentioned in the previous, part of this video, when what you offer is a product with no substitutes, and that is also indispensable for people like housing, you can raise price to absurd levels. And when it's not just you doing this, but a ton of people, it becomes a problem that in no way will regulate itself. The main reason for this is that the market can only offer one solution to this problem: create cheap housing. But of course, these houses end up being ugly little homes in developments very, very far from job centers, which is not a real solution. And the clearest proof is the number of these houses that end up abandoned because it's impossible to live there, isolated, without services, without transportation, miles away from job centers, as I already mentioned. There's even one place here in Mexico that's known as the Mexican Chernobyl, and it's basically a lot of houses that are abandoned because they're very, very far away. They don't have transportation, as already mentioned. Like they don't have the minimum, and these are places that could be used, but should be used but can't because they don't even have the basics to be able to communicate with the rest of society. I'm gonna link a video. I think there's a video of, if you know Spanish, I think there's a video of Lucita Comunica, if I'm mistaken, or another YouTuber, and I'm gonna put it here. There's probably like subtitles if you want to see it. It's a very good way of kind of take a peek of to the other side of this problem. Other than that, the market in cold terms has no visible motive, at least for now, to combat this problem. Why would it? It's the goose that lays the golden eggs for society and the government. You build apartments worth 1 million pesos, and if you take too long to sell them, by next year they're probably worth 1.2 million pesos. People take apartments that are supposed to be affordable housing and rent them for the full amount of their monthly mortgage, prices that are no longer affordable housing. They take places, and as I already mentioned a lot, Iztapalapa, or Azcapotzalco, stuff like that, that it's near job centers, that it's near the city, and they should be affordable, but they are not affordable because they take advantage of the people that come and offer to pay more. People rent out other dumps, offer large rooms without ventilations as lofts, and glorify rooftop shacks as independent housing. Ones that haven't been maintained or even swept in years, and elevated prices. And yes, demand is so high they'll even get rented. Because yes, there are some truly awful people in the landlord world. I think in the family we're lucky that we've always had, prior to this, we used to, own, and now we have pretty decent landlords. They're pretty nice. But nightmares with individual landlords are the standard in the city. People who were able to buy apartments when it was much easier and now treat their tenants as if they're doing them a favor. People who don't even consider the people they rent to as human beings, worthy of, the most basic dignity. I see it, as something that happens a lot in the States. I see people complaining about the landlords because they, some rent hikes or busted pipes, or they have an infestation and they don't want to treat it, or they, like, it's a whole problem. It's not only in Mexico, I know. But there's another huge problem here: hoarding. Because individual landlords are one thing, yes, but much of the housing in Mexico City is hoarded by investment funds, which own several apartments or even entire buildings to rent at ridiculous prices. They even come up with these absurd concepts like, like when you're basically paying a ton of money to live in something like a WeWork. I think it's weird. And yes, there are people that who also have the money and lawyers to evict even people who legitimately own the property. We're no longer talking about tenants. We're talking about someone with the deed. Because with money and power, it's easy to make offers they can refuse or simply buy off authorities. It happens a lot. So basically, we're screwed from both sides. On the individual side, many landlords have no consideration or respect for tenants. On the corporate side, when you have that much housing and that much money, you can set whatever prices you want, and people can only either accept them or find somewhere else to live. And when you're in Mexico City, you often have to, take it. And when they do that, they also allow individual landlords to raise their prices, because if the one person or company that runs this building or location is charging X, I can raise it too. People will pay, not because I think it's worth it, but because alternative it's living 20 damn kilometers from work and not even being able to take your kids to school. There is no free market when consumers cannot exert any pressure through market methods. That is, by not consuming. So that's not a free market. That's one group having the other by the balls and squeezing harder and harder, and we're screaming and we're in pain and they can hear us. Even worse, they can't hear us, they just don't care. Third, you can live in non-central areas and later they'll urbanize. That's what my parents did. Many people, like my grandparents, bought in a non-central area 30 years ago. And today, that non-central area is, for example, Iztapalapa, 3 steps from the metro, half an hour from downtown, or el centro, if you come here. That's what they call us. That's what we call it. And today you can even buy cheap housing in Iztapalapa. Today the non-central area is Tizayuca, or, like Ecatepec or something in the outskirts of the city. People need affordable and dignified housing today, not in 30 years. What's the point here? What's the process here of thought? Fourth, gentrification is beneficial. Okay, yes, many gentrified neighborhoods experience a boom in services, commerce, jobs, tourist development in general. However, this does not mean that, it's beneficial per se, especially when we stop focusing on a couple square kilometers and start thinking in second order terms and perspective. And we understand the following: as a society, as a whole, the housing problem is not convenient for us, like, at all. And since I doubt you'll want to see it from the standpoint of mere humanity, because here we're talking about human beings with very precarious lives, let's look at it into more technical terms. For starters, this market dynamics worsens inequality, since people with greater economic power can squeeze those with less economic power more and more easily. Inequality is inevitable. Yes, trying to eradicate it, it's probably absurd because it can be done. But inequality, if certain issues are not addressed, can reach a very high level, where it feeds itself and becomes a considerable problem. Because the people on the wealthy side on the spectrum have more and more money and power to profit from, keeping the other side precarious, maintaining this order of power. This is not beneficial for any society. Economic growth cannot be sustained when enough is worker making 1,500 pesos a month has to pay 700 pesos a month, so a billionaire investment, just, to be able to live in a place with minimal public services along with, one or two roommates. That's not development. Yes, inequality and poverty are also related to issues of, insecurity and greater risk factors for, like joining crime and organized crime, and well, we know how that is in Mexico. People also lose time, which impacts other areas, from time they could spend with their children, time that is essential for proper development, to time they could invest in learning skills and increase their value in the job market, or, even time for civic engagement activities. I think that, okay, precarity is not an excuse to avoid getting involved. There are plenty of examples, but it definitely makes it harder. And when there's no social engagement, there's no community cohesion, no political demands, um, there's also more polarization because we don't know anyone and we have to group people in the simplest, most primitive way possible. So there's no community in general. And because human beings distrust strangers by design, and nowadays even your 5 year neighbor is a stranger. And if we want to talk strictly economic terms, this also affects productivity. Long commutes increase stress and fatigue and, harming performance at work and productivity. They also cause tardiness and absenteeism and turnover, which carry high costs for companies. And, people have a hard time seeing the human side of this problem. And yes, this is also a public health problem that fosters worse eating habits and worse sleep habits, less physical activity, more stress, all the related illnesses, kids that end up being, raised by a phone and end up being, iPad kids and victims of red pill content and drug advice and everything. It's like you can see, right? You can see how this can be a source of many, many other problems, not only talking about health and, physical health and mental health and economic, and it could be the creation of many other problems that, if you don't care that affect them, care that it could affect you. No, having terrible urban development policies that make decent housing near job centers a luxury very few people can afford does not benefit us in cold numerical long-term terms. And from a human side, it also sucks to see people lose 6 hours a day just to not starve. So yes, oversimplifying the problem as it's because, like Americans, are coming here and they're gentrifying us, or Europeans now. Yeah, no, it's wrong. Because, believing the housing problem is not a problem is also wrong. Just because it's always been this way doesn't mean it should keep being this way. There's a lot more to unpack here, I think, but this is a good starting point. Gentrification and housing issues are complex, and looking for scapegoats like the digital nomads or the gringos or Canadian or, people. Yeah, no, that only invites populist politicians to offer things like taxing digital nomads or expelling them from the city, or, like, I don't know, trying to make us be less of a group that asks for something, else from them, and start, like pointing fingers at each other. And, you know these are measures that will solve nothing but distract us until we realize the problem keeps growing, and, we realize that we weren't the problem, they were, they, as in the people that are above us making the decisions. And I don't know, this is, like, as final thoughts, I think this is hard to talk about because there are a lot of, situations and problems, and it's very easy to just point fingers one at one another. And I feel like I can talk about this from a very personal experience. I moved from, the state of Mexico to Mexico City, which was at least a 2 to 3 hour drive. For college, I got into college here, and the family was able to be like, "Well, let's move," because my dad made he's always worked here, and he used to, had to do a very long commute to get here, and he didn't want that for me. I remember when I was very young, and he would have to get up at like 3 a.m., get out of the house by 4 a.m. to, like make the long commute to get here at like 8:30, 9. And so he wanted to prevent me having this long ass commute of 2 to 3 hours, like each way. So it was like four at least, four at least daily, I think. Even more if it rains. Like right now, it's rain season here in Mexico City, and there are people that, can't get to their homes. The subway stops working. Like, imagine all that. Imagine all those problematics. Like, you might understand why people want to live in Condesa or Roma. It's not exactly because they love Condesa or Roma. It's because they want to be near their place of work and everything, like I already mentioned before. So I've experienced it firsthand, and I know I understand why people want to live here. Um, like I didn't have any problem living before. I used to love, the place where I used to live, but it's understandable why people want to live here. And I know what people from the US think. I've seen bits of it online. They don't want the rich people. We don't want their poor people. They want Mexico for the Mexican. Then why do they keep on coming? Like, girl, you can't compare those two things. And I know it's not, like all the people, from the US or Canada or anything. I know it's not all of you guys, but it's like a big part of it. And like for starters, even though they're both immigrants, it's a very different situation and treatment. And I'm sorry, but I've never heard of a Mexican immigrant that goes to another country and tries to change their culture, complains about your culture with disdain, force you guys to learn our language, even when we're the ones going to your country. We don't have a problem with you guys coming. We love tourists. We love people who want to come and enjoy our country, or our culture. But people that come to disrespect our country or people in our culture, that's the type of people that we don't want. How do you guys feel when people disrespect you in, like your own country? Like there have been, I don't know if they've been known there, but there are a lot of people that sell there from the US that, like complain. Like one of them complained about some music that's very, linked to our culture. She complained about it, and she was like, "Oh, don't give them money because that makes them think that we want them to keep going. We want them to keep going, that type of music." But that type of music, it's, like it's dying already. It's living culture. We love it. Of course, we're going to give money to those people. And she was like complaining and saying she hated it, and it's like, girly pop. If you live here, you have to understand our culture. We try to do the same in the States, and I know it's not everybody there that tries to understand your culture, and I know it's not everybody here that doesn't understand our culture. I know. But I'm talking about very specific cases, and if I hope you guys listen to this with like an open mind. But yeah, I think that's mainly it. I hope that you guys liked it, that you could understand my train of thought here. I wrote down my thoughts. That's what I was reading, but most of it comes, like at the moment. I have a lot to say about this, and I wanted to give my 2 cents on this topic. Maybe help some people that aren't exactly from Mexico or have contact with people from Mexico. And I think you guys have seen like the problems, but not exactly the reasons and what we actually think, because it's not like everybody that wants all of, like people from the States away. No, like there's people from the States that are part of my family. My cousin's girlfriend, I don't know if she's seen this, but I love her, and she's from the States, and she's very conscious. And I think, for from what she's told me, like she and all her friends and people that live here that aren't from Mexico are very conscious about how they can, like sometimes affect us. And they're very conscious about the fact that, hey, it is something expensive, like that you can afford, but that that it's not exactly right for the people here. Speak up, like stuff like that. And I love that about her. Like we love a conscious queen. We love a conscious person. So that's mainly it. Like if you move here, if you move anywhere else, just be respectful of the culture, be respectful of the people, be aware that like while it might not be exactly your problem, the gentrification there, be aware of how you might be, like helping it. And be conscious about it, be mindful of the people that live there, raise your voice for them, because sometimes our own voices aren't heard. It's mainly just that. Be mindful, be respectful, and I guess that's my main take, because I don't think that the solution is kicking people out. Yeah, I guess that's my take, my final thoughts. Just be mindful, be respectful, educate yourself. If you watch this video till the end, I'm very grateful. This is my first video, so if you like something or didn't like something, please let me know. And yeah, thank you for staying here. And I guess that's it. I don't know. So yeah, my main topics are like pop culture and anything I like, cinema a lot. So like if you're into that, don't forget to subscribe. And I guess that's it. Thank you, and we'll see each other soon.